This is done from a background research perspective for a TV, and which are based on the same platform. So TVS Jupiter has 51% of the parts which are powertrain and 49% of the parts which are non-powertrain. Now look at the stark contrast in electric. Only 15% is powertrain. So the moving parts have reduced to a drastic extent. And the next line is that some of these powertrain businesses will go bust. Again, this is the powertrain part and the non-powertrain part that I want to focus upon. There are some parts which will stay as it is. There are some parts which can be tweaked slightly, and there are some parts which are non-usable in a complete EV scenario. So here is the people's perspective. You have close to 35 million, 3.5 crore people which are employed by automobile sector. And for the lack of data, we are not sure where they are exactly employed. So the Venn diagrams or the circles that you see is only a smaller component of the complete universe. And these are only the formal industries and the formal employment that is being provided. So automobile component manufacturers employ somewhere around 5 million, OEMs employ 3.7 million, dealership employ 2.5 million, and service center employ 0.5 million. But a lot of the numbers which you see, the roadside service centers or the repair shops, are not included in these circles. That's why they fall in the larger blue rectangle that I'm talking about. And these are the people who are at risk of losing their livelihoods, losing their wages and incomes. And these are the people we have to think about, and how do we move them together in our EV story. So this is the focus that I wanted to leave you with, and I'm happy to answer any questions at the end that you have. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.
A very good morning to everyone, all present. So making this PPT was like, if I give an example, was like catching the Mumbai local, and you have only one target in mind, that is you need to catch the local. Here is a brushed, and what you are carrying, the luggage doesn't matter. Or the same thing is when you are going to purchase an EV. Even if like I have conflict of interest in this because my wife is an automobile leader, so every time she is more obsessed about. There are two big basic issues. The first issue that we dealt is the costs. The costs are still higher, very higher for the middle. The second issue is lithium batteries dispose kahan karna hai. That is basically the biggest issue which electric vehicle industry and dealership conferences across have to deal with. So basically the PPT would be like having an electric vehicle. The issues that we have, the issues as an administrator, because as George Bernard Shaw once said, one who can do, he does, one who cannot do, he teaches, and one who actually cannot teach, administrates. So basically, as an administrator, I would like to discuss the problems that a small medium city of India, a city like Rourkela, having a population of just lesser than a million, like 7 to 8 lakh population, tried, like I still say, tried to get into this thing of urban mobility, trying to bring about certain changes in urban mobility. Next. If you just basics to begin with, virtually what has become important is vehicles have trumped population growth. The fact is now moving people versus moving cities or moving vehicles. That is more important. What are we actually moving? People, vehicles or cities? So it took 60 years virtually for India to cross 1.105 million registered vehicles, and thereafter the same number was added to in 6 years. And the modal share of four-wheeler, as was discussed in electric, will increase to about 45% in 2050. Just because Indians believe use ho ya na ho, khareed ke rakhta hai. Next. So if you see the mode share of the work trips in India, basically 30% do not travel at all, and that has increased with Netflix and Amazon Prime and post-COVID. And 13% by bicycle, 15% by private transport, 23% on foot, 1% any other, 18% use of public transport, 47% walk and cycle, maybe because of the cost or maybe because you have not given them roads, 21% use public transport and 32% use cars and two-wheelers. Now transport, for example, this is my city at the top of, is an industrial township. Virtually we had the AIILSG steel plant, which is India's first public sector integrated steel plant, made with German support way back in the 1950s. And most important is transportation still accounts for the CO2 emissions that are there, and being a doctor by profession, the medical one, I can still count 10 number of diseases that air pollution does. So as far as per capita availability is there, India is far behind. And if I go discuss the public sector system in Rourkela of what was, we have basically something called as the SUTT, because Rourkela belongs to the district of Sundargarh. It is Sundargarh Urban Transport Trust. So basically they used to run public sector vehicles and for Rourkela and the adjoining areas. However, this is the details of the average daily traffic built around different areas and how that was worked out. So the CDP that was made for the city for a horizon year like 2031, the growth of population was discussed, and accordingly the per capita trip rate was discussed, and then the total trip that was there was worked out. Recently, as you know, CRUD, as they say, Capital Region Urban Transport in the state of Odisha, has been a landmark in transport development across the world, getting 2 UN Habitat Awards and getting 2 UN National Awards. And what has become, so recently this Mo bus service, under the Mo bus is my bus, in Odia Mo means mine. So that's for the increasing the sense of ownership. That has been introduced in the city of Rourkela. We started with 30 buses, now we are with 55 buses. We have a very trained staff catering to inclusivity, because Sundargarh basically is a scheduled district with a huge tribal population. So the basic people who work in that bus, the conductor, the helper, the driver, are from women of marginal communities, or they are from people from tribal communities. So that inclusivity is there, because every administrator knows that whenever a new thing is introduced, it faces a lot of inertia, and that inertia we didn't have from the private bus. And now if you see, within a short time, it was introduced around just in the 5th of Jan, and within 3 months we have reached such high riderships as was shown. The next thing that we'll talk of is, as I said, a lot of people walk to their offices. The very fact is pedestrianization. We feel that if you share mobility, when you walk together, maybe a morning walk and everything, you're not sharing mobility, you're sharing lives. Every guy sitting here knows that in his college, when you walk with your friend, you discuss everything of school. Every housewife knows the turmoils of being a housewife. All those things are discussed perhaps on the road when you walk together. So we believe that this is the photos of the pedestrianization that we have done in Rourkela. Rourkela had the privilege of hosting the Men's Hockey World Cup 2023, and India also, we had virtually 16 countries coming up. All this infra was brought together just in close to within a year, like we have now proper pedestrian pathways along the entire ring road of Rourkela, which is a 25-kilometer road along the entire city. So the entire city, that ring road was pedestrianized, because that is considered as, along with that, all the major 4 colonies that we have, which is Chend, Uditnagar, Pasani colony and Civil Township, like huge colonies. And Chend used to be once the largest residential colony in Asia. That is now being crossed, I think, by something in MP and Gujarat, but it used to be, and it's still 3rd or 4th. It's huge. So that is how we try to pedestrianize the entire park. And these are basically smart roads. The first one is the road that led to the Birsa Munda Hockey Stadium. That is currently, we got the Guinness World Record for the largest seated hockey stadium in the world. There's a nice National Geographic documentary on that which you can check. But then that road leading to, that was what we worked out, and that too has been worked in a period of 6 months. So with proper paved pathways, huge paved shoulders, around 4 meters, like a huge crowd. Like every day we would have a crowd, a seating crowd of 22,000, and then on that an additional crowd around with all those LEDs arrangement made. So we had to do that. The entire lighting and everything was done. And then as far as cycling was concerned, the best thing about encouraging cycling is it's clean, it's calm, it cuts spots, and the thing is it breaks barriers. These are the cyclothons that we organize. And if you see the photo on the upper right, so that was when there's an Urdu school, it's a Urdu primary school for people of the minority community. And the first time girls from there ever participated in an event. They came together in huge numbers, participated in that event, and now all of them are members. We have something called as the Rourkela Cycling Association, because Minati Mahapatra Madam was the first Arjuna awardee in the entire country for cycling. So she comes from Rourkela. So it was her initiative for the Rourkela Cycling Association. So they're all members of Rourkela Cycling Association, and we personally believe that if we promote cycling, it is clean, it's calm, it's cutting costs, and it's breaking barriers. Next is, as was there, we tried to introduce, like all smart cities, the ITMS, the Intelligent Traffic Monitoring Systems. Because what is more important is, just mobility is not important. Monitoring mobility is equally important. It is equally important to make it safe and to make it secure. So virtually we have more than 13 ATCS automatic traffic control systems, we have more than 700 cameras monitoring, it's full real-time update given, and as they say, it's less of a technical support and more of a peer support that people follow the rules. That is much more important. Next, that is the stadium as we showed, and that is the newly built Birsa Munda International Hockey Stadium, the world's largest hockey stadium. And this is the main thing that I wanted to say is when mobility is concerned. Rather, this is a question for all of you. As administrators will like answer to this. Special situations require special measures. What we need to say, normally a city handles a particular crowd, but when there is a huge crowd for whatever event it is, like for example, if there is a Kumbh in Allahabad, whatever big event it is, mobility needs to cater to that also. Like police can only do for law and order, magistrate can do that, but it has to cater for the future and the cater that the city might host a big event in the future. So that is equally important. And here, as I said, the roads that were built double the size, the pedestrian pathways were built accordingly, and we catered to that special situation. If you see, we had melas like this, around 4 melas. We had a city fest in which virtually every famous singer of India was there to perform every night. At the same time, we had 3 national level melas. So it was like everything, the crowds were busy, and yet we're very happy that it was managed quite well. So that is what for huge long-term planning, support from the police, because mobility itself requires support from n number of factors. It is ultimately mobility is a team effort. You don't travel alone. Like all journeys get spoiled if your partner is not there. So as it may be tripling or it may be any family vacation, everybody understands what the claims of the shareholder is. So what I was saying is, another important thing is to decongest roads, we need to develop the nearby spaces, because when the traffic increases high, where does the person go? If you see on the first image, that is the road that I was showing you. The side road was something which was a free space, but gradually we developed that space, we made a path that the crowds will increase definitely, but at the same time there will be space for diverting things. The same thing if you see on the other side, this was basically, it's a huge crowded slum, which is Nala Road of the minority community. The front area was basically slush and garbage. But to decongest those particular roads, we properly develop that space around. So mobility also focuses if side ke spaces अच्छे हो. Like if side ke spaces अच्छे हो, then only people can move, and that is more important. Then another very important thing is steel plant. What I said is industrial mobility is equally important, because as they say, 3 things are important. The profits are important. Trucks cannot be delayed. There are more than 400 trucks entering Rourkela every day. So that is something which we had to manage. We virtually had to shift, because when the Germans built it, the ring road was built to cater to the traffic, but now normal traffic uses it. So virtually we had to sit with RSP administration, get approvals, and virtually shift. And shifting 400 trucks per day from a different gate is not an easy job, because they have their own lobbies, they have their own interests, and because costs matter, and at the end of the day, businesses matter. So solutions also have to be cost effective, and that is what. And we were very happy that we could do it, and the support of RSP administration was there. As I said, accessory infra, it is not necessary, but it is the prime focus. You have to develop surface level car parkings. Parkings have to be there on the road, side of the road. The same thing, the MLCP has to be there. That is a photograph of the Birsa Munda Athletic Stadium that has also been developed at a cost of 150 crores from Rourkela Smart City Limited. And we have a subsequent MLCP to cater. So that has been the questions: safe, resilient. As we are part of U20, and as they say, the G20 is based on Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. We have one earth. We have one common future. So at last, I said, it was a hot thing. So I've written 3-4 lines of poetry which I would like to end with. It says, lives matter. Lives matter than the last seat on the bus. If you have to choose the last seat on the bus, but public transport is important. Lives matter more than the last seat on the bus. It's always calm, clean cycling without the hush and the rush. Lives matter more than the last seat on the bus. It's always calm, clean cycling without the hush and the rush. The last on the line, the one who cannot afford. The last on the line, who needs to move. Who needs to move. The last on the line, who needs to move. Happy toddlers, people who just need the accessory spaces, the streetscaping. Happy toddlers on the streetscape, they have to move. Happy toddlers on the streetscape, they have to move. Let's walk together. It's an appeal, let's walk together as we have a future to share. Let's walk together as we have a future to share. The earth is one for all, so we all need to care. The earth is one for all, so we all need to care. Thank you.
Allergens and what are the types of challenges we experience. What does inclusion and mobility mean? And Dr. Mohapatra and both Mr. Saxena have covered that. And then what are some of the solutions? So a large part of my presentation will also look at what are those levers, be it around regulations or the way we plan, design cities and the way we implement and finance them, to look for ideas and innovations emerging from not just India but also from other parts of the world. So this we have seen that nearly 300 million people in India still lack access to basic road infrastructure, which hinders their access to services, be it going to office, schools, and so on. In many cities, the transportation is unsustainable, it's not safe, inefficient, inaccessible, and also unaffordable. This is our transportation sector. You can see from this image that not only it leads to traffic congestion, health issues, but also has a drastic impact on the greenhouse gas emissions that the country generates. Almost 10% of our total national GHG emissions is from the transport sector, and the road transportation carries a larger share of that. Another aspect of the challenges context are the road accidents. If you see this in the context of numbers, 1 lakh people are killed every year because of road accidents, which means that every hour there are 47 accidents, 18 persons losing their life because of the way we design our roads. We have already seen this diagram on the rise, the growth of the personal private vehicles, almost 300 million vehicles in India. So now moving on, how does this all fit into the global context of sustainability and sustainable urbanization? So the Agenda 2030, which is focusing on the sustainable development goals globally, has identified this as an important issue. The Sustainable Development Goal 11, which is on urbanization, making urbanization safe, inclusive, resilient, and affordable, has a specific target to measure how well cities and countries are performing in terms of the access to public transportation. And you can see here, it's not only looking at overall numbers, but also disaggregating it by gender, by age, by persons with disabilities, which is where the inclusion aspect would fit in. So what does inclusion and mobility imply? You can see here some illustrations on poor design, that just because the curve is so high, it could be inaccessible to perhaps elderly persons, children, persons with disability. So design, the way we design the standards codes affect the accessibility of that. This is another illustration on what inclusion means from the perspective of persons with disabilities. So you can see in poor design, for somebody who is visually challenged, impaired, these elements that they use, tactile elements that they use on the road, suddenly abruptly ending, means that they just have no vocabulary, design vocabulary to continue their path independently and with dignity. From the gender perspective, many cities, especially from the perspective of women and children, the roads are not designed for safety. And an illustration that it's possible to have good roads, and as Dr. Mohapatra has also shown through good examples, by the way we design streets, give pedestrians more focus and more priority. So it's possible. Again, what does that mean in terms of inclusion? We have to, this is just an example that we have built just from the aspect of women and girls. So doing a mapping of what are the different types of activities that women are responsible for in their day-to-day lives, how accessible those activities are, and then what are the types of guidelines and standards that we need to put in place so that the commute for those aspects becomes easier, it becomes walkable. We are providing planning and design solutions to cater to their needs. Streets safety for children is also important, so just some illustrations. This is an example of a road from Mysuru, and we are working with the city in order to see how to transform that space so that it is more effective, safe for children. Good examples from road on this. In this section, I'll move on to what are the levers of implementation that mayors, that commissioners, that technical officials have with us that we can influence to make sure that the intent of safe, inclusive roads can be translated from paper to on ground. The first lever are the laws, regulations, and standards. We all know that there is a master plan. The master plan typically has a section on transportation. And what are the specific aspects under those transportation, under the master plan, that can be influenced to make cities plan for more inclusion, to have proper access, and focusing on NMT, what are the types of standards around road widths, around pedestrian footpaths, and so on. So that is one type of instrument, that is a statutory document that should make sure that we embed aspects of inclusive road transportation into it. There are tools that are available to do an assessment of the master plans and to score them on whether they are meeting the intent, the targets towards this goal. And then looking at how to update the guidelines and standards, because ultimately these are the rules, these are the documents that engineers, that practitioners fall back on to when they start implementing the projects on ground. There are also other options that the decision makers have available, so secure travel in the night programs, some aspects of what that would look like. So at the level of the laws, regulations, program design, these are some of the tools and how the cities are doing that. Now when we move to the urban planning and design aspect, I want to draw your attention to the city level aspects. This is an example of illustration, assessment that we did for City of Bhopal, where if we look at the accessibility, still 25% of the people do not have access to public parks where they can walk to. Again, measuring accessibility of people to open spaces, to access of people to bike paths, bike sharing. So it's important to spatially map these types of information and see what are the pockets within the city where we are not performing well, where there are gaps in terms of the type of infrastructure that is being put in, and then what are the intervention processes that can be put in place from diagnostics all the way to the design and financing. So again, tools available where we need to do a paradigm shift from streets for vehicles to streets as public spaces, and the speakers before me have also alluded to this, that how do we make streets safer, how do we make sure that children feel safe, the engagement that can happen on the streets is made possible by the way we design. So an illustration of tools available for that, and again a template of options that if a city wants to prioritize ecological elements within their road right of way, what type of mobility elements that would improve the safety, comfort, efficiency, whether looking at more active or passive elements. So those tools can be or should be included in the design guidelines and in the way we look at preparing the technical documents. And it's possible through good design. This is an example from the Gopalpur, where by application of these types of tools, transformation of cities, streetscapes is possible to something bigger and better. So again, an example of what the transformation by applying tools on ecological aspects, on mobility aspects, can transform a city's streets from something like this to something that is more active and responsive. Some illustrations here. And on the local implementation, I think this is another aspect that I wanted to cover, where good designs are good, but then how do we fund them and how do we finance them? So there are tools that are available to look at what sort of block cost estimates. It's important to take it down to that level of detail and to identify funding. So pool in funding from different state, national level missions for convergence. I think it's an important aspect that we see sometimes missing when financial decisions are being made locally on how to finance these projects. Another aspect that is important and critical going forward because of the discussions around climate change, which is here. We are living in that scenario, and the implications of the GHG emissions that urbanization causes in the environment. So again, there are options to show a business as usual scenario where we would be investing in roads for public vehicles versus focusing on a non-motorized vehicle type of right of way, which would also lead to carbon sequestration. So we can design roads in a way that it reduces the GHG impacts that are produced through them. Some illustrations. And this is where I want to again highlight that when we talk about the participation aspects on steering the stakeholders, we have a vision on what are the elements to introduce into the road right of way. But as you can see here, implementation requires coordination amongst many city departments. It's not just the roads, it's also the storm drain and so many others that need to work together for creating a nice comprehensive streetscape. And so all the more emphasis on building partnerships, getting the stakeholders together that work on different elements of the road. And this is the last section, maybe a couple of more minutes, again emphasizing on the stakeholder engagement and our experience even from UN Habitat and the work that we've done in cities is to do a very detailed mapping of stakeholders and a tiered approach where we know that in the cities the municipalities and the urban development authorities are the lead entities to take any sort of these final decisions. But then there is a whole network or ecosystem of other types of players that are equally responsible for what we do and how our landscape, the streetscapes are shaped. And it's important to engage them right from the beginning of design stage to bring in consensus around that. And some tools here I want to share on how to engage with people. So we see from the experience outside India that planning and the way we engage is also evolving into a more digital realm. People, the youth especially, are very engaged on using digital tools. So there are options, or there are tools that we have tested outside India, where if we can conceptualize digital Lego, the building blocks that children play with, but in a digital form, that has been very effective in bringing together different age groups, different types of community members together to do that online, to do their planning, designing at the neighborhood level as a game, and come up with some design ideas that can actually be translated once the ideas are ready through some sort of consensus. Then it becomes easier to then translate them into technical drawings and then implementation, which is a collective process with the communities, with the planners, with the civil engineers, corporations, and development authorities. And I'll leave you with some reference documents. I've just highlighted a few which are more special to me around how to bring in gender aspects into the way we design our cities, focus on disability, youth, and elderly. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Agarwal, for the wonderful presentation. Now, may I please request Mr. Amit Bhatt, Managing Director.
We look at cleaning road transport. Now, walking, cycling, absolutely, we should do in cities, we should promote in cities. And there is no other option but to promote walking and cycling. But even with that walking and cycling, cities will have motor vehicles. Motor vehicles that will carry people in the form of public transport. You will have motor vehicles that will carry goods, because we all need deliveries. And then you will have some motor vehicles which will also carry people, either through two-wheelers or cars or any other form of transport. Now all this will have some kind of impact on the environment. And that is something we have to think very clearly on cleaning. And in case you want to know a little more, there's a very nice series on Netflix called Dirty Money Season 1 and Episode 1. Please do watch that series. It will really open the eyes and the understanding of why cleaning road transport is so important. So, just as a snapshot, if you look at globally, almost a quarter of the emission comes from transport sector. And within that quarter, if you see, light duty vehicle and heavy duty vehicle, and then some buses, account for 75% of the emission. And this number in India is very, very different, because in India, depending on which study you choose, the number would be anywhere between 14 to 15%. But in India, emission from transport sector is rising at the fastest pace. So today it is 14-15%, but believe me, 3-4 years down the line, it will not be at that number unless we do something. And road transport accounts for 90% of the emission. Now, why is this situation important, especially in developing countries like India, in Latin America, in Africa, is that while if you look at this business as usual scenario, Europe and North America is able to reduce emission from 2020 to 2050, but all that reduction in emission is offset by the rise which will happen in India, China, Brazil, in Africa. And then on the extreme right, you will have emissions coming out from the aviation sector and the maritime sector. So whatever benefits that we'll get from some of these emission reduction will not be enough, because the developing economies are going to offset that number. So if we are really looking at Paris, if we are really looking at net zero, if we are really looking at climate sustainability, we have to reduce emission from transport sector, especially in developing economies. And that's the focus of my next 7-8 minutes of talk, is what do we do. Now, if climate is not a compelling argument, then I would bring in the second argument, which is about energy security. Because if you look at 90% of the emission and the energy consumption in India is from the transport sector. Almost 87% of the oil we import from outside. And with the current geopolitical crisis, we know how it impacts both in terms of the finances of the country, but also in terms of the inflation. So if we are really looking at from the energy security perspective, we also have to move away from this oil-based economy. And that is point number 2. And again, if that is not even a compelling argument, then let me bring in the third argument, which is that we're talking about public health. And these are numbers from Delhi. If you look at particulate matter 2.5 emission, roughly 40% from transport. If you look at NOx emission, 80-85% of transport. So cleaning transport is also important for public health. And just to put this into a slightly bigger perspective, we did some research to understand what are the premature deaths that happen in countries that can be directly attributed to transport vehicle exhaust. And we found that India roughly loses about 74,000 lives every year. Premature deaths directly attributable to the exhaust emission that comes from road transport sector. So this is also an important argument. So the question is, what do we do? And this is not my slide, it's a slide that came from Climate Trends. And they looked at a 2050 scenario and they said, we have all various policy measures that are there. How these policy measures stack up to achieve what we committed in Paris. So we can do innovative urban planning, we can do a lot of what Patul said, linking transport and urban planning together. It will give you some benefit. We can do modal shift, more public transport, benefits, we can increase the efficiency, we can bring in alternative fuels. All these are required. But if you look at the maximum reduction, is going to come from electrification of transport. So, last to last talk, we were asked one question, and the question was, what powertrain technologies can deliver on climate goals? Very simple answer. And we asked, okay, so what's your take on that? And this is what we came with the conclusion. That if we are looking at cleaning transport, three important takeaways from this slide. One, internal combustion engine cannot deliver on climate goal. Plain and simple. You use petrol, you use diesel, you use CNG, you use any other fuel. Internal combustion engine cannot deliver on climate goal. That's point number one. Point number two, if you look at closely CNG, which is touted as a green fuel, if you include the methane that leakage that happens in production, distribution, fueling of vehicles, if you account for that methane leakage, then CNG vehicle is even worse than diesel vehicles. From climate change perspective, it does have a health perspective benefit because it has lower particulate matter emission. And third, there are only two technologies that can deliver: battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell. The question is, how are you seeing this? So if you include all the emissions from well to wheel, which is production, distribution, usage and end of life, for various fuel types, various powertrain technologies, if you stack up all the emissions together, you will find that battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell are far, far superior than any other technology. That's first point. Second, what if we clean the grid? What if we increase the renewable energy uptake? You will see the green only gets greener. So, but that's one part of it. The second is that how does this number add up to a country like India where 75% of the energy comes from fossil fuels? That's the question we often get. But if you're generating 75% of the energy from fossil fuel, how can you say electric vehicles are clean? We did that analysis also, and we looked at the car as well as two-wheelers in India. And we found that even with the high fossil fuel-based energy, an Indian car is almost greener by 19 to 20%, and two-wheelers by 40 to 50%. If you look at a 2030 scenario, where the country has committed to produce 50% of its energy from non-fossil fuel sources, you will see it only gets greener. So, the point over here is that we now know the pathway to clean road transport, and the pathway is one: produce green electrons, renewable energy. Store, you have two options: store those green electrons in a battery and use it, which is a battery electric vehicle, or use that green electrons to produce green molecules, which is green hydrogen, and then the green hydrogen converts to fuel cell electric vehicle. So that's the big takeaway that we have realized, that the pathway to clean transport is electric. Now, this does not mean that walking, cycling is a competitor to electrification. Absolutely not. What cities need: promote walking, to promote cycling, to promote public transport, and clean that public transport to electric. And whatever vehicle is left has to be forced to switch to zero emission transport. And we have realized that cities over the world have used 4 principles to accelerate EV adoption, and that is what we should look at in India. One, setting the vision of when you are going to phase out internal combustion engine. Second, how can you increase vehicle supply by creating some kind of financial incentive? We saw earlier how FAME kick-started this revolution in India. We also have to look at investing money on creating infrastructure, both for refueling hydrogen as well as charging vehicles, and then some kind of incentives for market education and this. So with this, happy to end this conversation, but we'll be very pleased to take any further questions. Thank you so much.
And dignitaries on the dais. So we have talked about the environmental impacts of transport, and we have understood that electrification of transport is required, and when we want to transform this transport, we have two options. With this clean energy, we run our own cars, our own two-wheelers, or we run buses through this clean technique. Now, having said that, I'll take you through the social impacts of transport. How better transport planning can have multifold impacts on the social fabric of a city and also for any country. So my title of the presentation is Equity and Justice through Transport. So let me tell you about the difference between equality and equity. You must have seen this picture earlier also. So when we talk about equality, it is like giving equal access to the resource to all the individuals. But when we talk about equity, then we will have to take into consideration the present case of an individual. And I would take you through some of the research findings that we have done, which was sponsored by Indian Council for Social Sciences and Research. And I will showcase in front of you how a better transport planning has huge impact on society tier which is vulnerable. Now, I'm sure that here the people who are sitting in this hall are privileged and they have access to good transport. They might have their own cars, they must be residing near a metro line, near a metro station in very big apartments, but not all are privileged like that. So transport seems like a very technical subject, but it has huge impact on society. And with that, I will like to bring your focus towards women. Women have very different travel needs, and to fulfill this travel need, they have a very different scenario. They have safety considerations, they have availability considerations. As now let me take this to this first. In this. So as you can see in this slide, that access to driving licenses in India is very low amongst ladies, and that makes the transport demand for ladies to be catered by someone else. Like if I ask the ladies, August ladies sitting here, how many of you have driving licenses in your name? I'm sure not more than 50% would be having that. That too when we are from a very privileged class of the society. Now when we go deeper into the society, we find that this patronage is only 1% or 2%. So a lady doesn't know how to drive, and even if there is a mode of transport in the family, she doesn't have that privilege to use that transport because that is primarily used by the male member of the society, of the family. So now the female is dependent on someone. So here is an opportunity for public transport to come in and cater to the need of women. Now the second aspect, the elderly. As we all are certain to grow old in coming 20-30 years, we are all supposed to grow old. So our dependence on transport will be high because for every of our needs we will have to, because we are not in a condition to drive on our own. In India we have a very recent scenario of IPTs, intermediate paratransit, where we can call an auto and we can call a rickshaw and we can access to our wherever we need to go, whatever services we want, we can access that. But in cities like Delhi, Mumbai, where things are getting revamped very fast, this is becoming a real concern. So we will have to think about elderly and their transport and travel needs very specifically while making our plans and policies. Now, economically weaker sections. We think that the economically weaker section will be spending very less amount of money on the transport. But this research that we did, we found that if we talk in terms of the percentage of the monthly incomes, the most of the expenditure which is done by this class of the society is the people who are from the lower income groups. They are spending to the tune of, you can see, 60%, 40% of their incomes on transport. I hope you are able to get my point here. Like if you are earning 10,000 rupees a month and you are spending 1,000 rupees, it translates to 10%. But if I am earning 5,000 and I am spending 1,000, it translates to 20%. So here the X and Y, the factor is very important. So we will have to be considerate while planning our transport towards the economically weaker sections also. Now here if you see in this graph, this relates to Denmark in year 1961 and 2006. If you see the difference between the driving license holding pattern between ladies and gents, over a period of 30-40 years, they have seen that this gap has basically narrowed down and they have transformed into an inclusive, equitable society for men and women both. This is what I am trying to take you through. Now, this research that we did in Bhopal was done at the suburban region of Bhopal, where we took 3 cases, 3 neighborhoods. One neighborhood was from a very elite, where one duplex was 60-70 lakh rupees. Then there was a neighborhood where one duplex was 20 lakh rupees, a little middle income neighborhood. And then there was a village nearby. And we took samples of the households. And we found that the households which were having access to public transport, their ladies, unka income hai, they have income, they have jobs. So access to transport has translated into better placement of women in the society. This is what I am trying to showcase in this graph, that 3 columns where dots are placed. Each dot is response of a lady, income versus the access to public transport, and it has been mapped here. You can see in village where ladies do not have access to transport and they do not have access to driving license, their financial health is poor. Now, similarly, age and mobility, we have discussed about this. Now, what we need to deliberate on. We need to deliberate on, like when we select projects. When we select projects, we select on financial rate of returns like IRRs, FIRRs. But we somehow negate the social aspects of any project that we do. So the idea is, we see public transport investments as subsidies. But when we make flyovers, when we make metros, when we make bypasses for a city, we see them as an investment to the city. Like if I quote an example, city of Bhopal is planning to operationalize some 10 to 15 kilometers of metro system, that is 2 routes, 2 small stretches, with an estimated cost of 4,500 crores. Now, this metro system is going to serve a very limited people and very limited geographical area of Bhopal. Also, the investment that is being made looking into the projected ridership is not going to be achieved. So the state has to fund operations of metro, which is a very costly affair. And if 4,500 crores is invested in bus-based public transport system, we could have used hundreds of buses for 100 years in that money. From the interest itself, we could have operationalized that system. So when as a policy maker, when as an administrator, you look for transport options for the city, we should always look into that aspect, whether this system that we are planning to choose is actually required by the city or it is not required by the city, or we are just falling into the in the trap of making ourselves like we have a metro city, we are a metro city. Alright. So we should always think about system as a whole, transport as a system, and we should always consider the impact of transport on society. We should always focus on the economical aspects that the EIR of a project into consideration. And we should get out of this gimmick that public transport investments are subsidies. And for ending my presentation here, it is pertinent to mention that in India, girls quit their education majorly because it's very difficult for them to access schools. So look into this importance of transport on women empowerment. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much to the AIILSG to give us an opportunity to present our views. It's always a challenge coming after such an esteemed panel as a last speaker. Everything which has to be said has already been said. So I'll try to focus on a few important things from my perspective. Let me begin by saying that, and congratulating Dr. Mohapatra. It was a wonderful work which you are doing in Kela. There are a lot of things which came out in the talks. One underlying theme to me, which was touched upon by many speakers, but not very explicitly recognized, I want to put it on the table, that often this debate on inclusive, sustainable transport is a lot about public transport versus private interest. I think Abhishek, you briefly touched upon that, and also Professor Tiwai, you briefly mentioned about it. But I think it's something which, as a society, we need to think about, from a public policy perspective. Because when you think about inclusive transport, then public transport has to be the first answer to us. And our public transport is in shambles. I have no hesitation in saying, because unless we recognize where we are, we will not start addressing the problem. On the other hand, when you look at automobile sector, it is maybe close to 10% of our economy. It contributes hugely to exports, to jobs in the country. So, if you have to, improve public transport, something will have to give. So, as a society, unless we take a conscious call whether we want sustainable, inclusive transport, or we want automobile sector. Also, by the way, I think Amit, you talked about energy security. Yes, but we also have the world's largest refinery in this country. We want to be the world's largest coal producer. And there are a lot of jobs associated with these sectors. So, we cannot have everything. We are the most polluted cities in the world. Out of 50 cities, more top 50 polluted, either 35 or 40 are in our country. And you talk about 74,000 deaths. I think what ICMR has said is 1.7 million additional deaths due to air pollution. 1.5% of GDP lost. So when you talk about these numbers, we have to take a conscious call. And I feel that, not only from energy security, not only from climate change, but, from an inclusion perspective, for our cities to deliver, growth, for our cities to be inclusive, public transport has to be the answer. And we need to significantly, dramatically expand buses. So, Dr. Mohapatra, I'm happy you have 100 buses. I think you need maybe 1,000 buses, not just 100 buses. And if you look at numbers, take a look at a city like Delhi. we have very limited number of buses. And often, the question is, who will pay for this if we expand buses? And if you look at numbers, going to a city like Delhi, maybe you need 20,000, 25,000 buses, with a norm of one bus per 1,000 people. The cost of doing that is about 10,000 crores per annum. And it's not difficult to generate 10,000 crores. From a city like Delhi, it's not difficult. Just look at the numbers. We have subsidy of 3,000 crores just on electricity. And do we need electricity subsidy in a city like Delhi? Maybe yes, few people, but 80% don't. We collect only 1/3 of the property tax in Delhi, just about 3,000 crores. Whereas the actual number should be about 10,000 crores. And I'm not talking of increasing the property tax, I'm just saying collect what is due, which is extremely low. We have subsidy, everyone gets free water. Do everyone need free water? So yes, so if you have to have public transport generating, few thousand crores in big cities like Delhi, which has the highest per capita income in the country, is not at all difficult. So what is the solution? So I think, public transport needs, good state and city, transport corporations. And that is one thing which I think was not very explicitly mentioned. I would like to put it on the table that we need to reform our state transport undertakings, our city transport corporations. And we have done that kind of reform in many, many sectors. You look at airports, you look at telecom, you look at power. We have moved the needle very significantly. Why can't we move the needle on public, on the buses? I fully agree, yes, go to e-buses, electric buses. We should not go to diesel or even CNG, go to electric buses. But why is it so difficult? It's not. The latest numbers from the bidding suggest that the electric buses are actually cheaper than diesel buses. But we're still buying diesel buses. So I think that's something very, very important, that state transport undertakings are reformed in a significant manner. They are co-products. They have, performance targets, quality, etc., all determined and followed. And you will see that we have much more inclusive city. It's shocking what Dr. Tiwari was saying, that, poor are spending 40% of their income on this transport. So certainly, you will see at the bottom of the pyramid improvement in the lifestyles because of that. Another way of funding this is, look at the taxes which we collect, from private vehicles and so on. Why can't a part of those taxes be used to fund electric buses in our cities to dramatically expand them? I think we should use that. We have the highest taxation on the petrol, so in a way, we already have very high carbon taxes, but none of those carbon taxes or taxes on petrol, diesel are used to decarbonize. Last but not the least, I think there is an opportunity for the cities, as we expand infrastructure to do it in a much more sustainable way. And that opportunity arises because we are seeing increasing amount of convergence between the transport, energy, and even telecom sectors. They're all converging. And therefore, as we go about building this infrastructure, we should leverage these synergies. We should leverage the technology to do it in a much more sustainable way, in an integrated way. Because A, it will reduce cost, B, it will improve the quality of life. When you look at our cities, we build a beautiful road, Dr. Mahapatra has done that, but then the electric utility will come and take off the roads. Or if they don't, then you will find all the footpaths have been occupied by either poles or by people parking on the streets. So this integration, which means that for example, can we put all this underground infrastructure in conduits, where you have the electric network, you have the telecom network. Some cities are building the gas network. All of that can be integrated, and that's a big opportunity. One of our research, in 5 cities in India, we have seen that that presents a big opportunity, and people are very conscious. This is the research. It is available on the NIUA website as well. We have done it jointly with NIUA, and we feel that it will not only improve the quality of life, it will reduce the cost, but also on the environment sustainability, because a lot of pollution in our cities relates to road transport, but also to the construction, the never-ending construction which goes on our cities. So thank you so much again. I'll stop here. I know we're already perhaps on the time, so thank you so much for this opportunity.
Ladies and gentlemen, any questions? You may raise your hands.
Excellent presentations by all the distinguished speakers. One question I have is the move towards electric vehicles. Very strong case being made. Issues on energy storage and charging points, not only in public places, but also within apartment blocks where both normal vehicles or conventional vehicles and e-vehicles are there. The grouping or positioning is a server because the rules and standards do not provide that. We've got a big problem with vehicles already having gone much faster, whereas the rules, regulations in the urban sector having not got them.
Look at Nexon vehicles. I know someone who has 180,000 kilometers done, and still the vehicle is almost battery is almost 95%. So what we are seeing is the batteries are performing much better than what we initially anticipated. Life is good. But then what you do is something you have to think out, especially with the second line of battery, stationary storage is something that you can use. And then the whole question of recycling. And we are seeing from some examples from Europe that almost 95-96% of the recycling is happening. And lithium and some of the critical minerals are being used for, again, advanced energy solutions.
My name is there is no doubt about that. So as and when the GDP increases, there is an economic growth, the vehicle ownership is definitely going to increase. Regarding your point about the difference in prices, see, so there are two aspects of it. Electric vehicle as an upfront has a higher cost than the petrol diesel one, but from a running perspective, it costs around 1.6 to 1.10 depending on the different categories. So the running cost is very, very low. Now what is happening is, so India being 70% of the people falling below the $10,000 mark, you need to have access to cheaper finance so that you are able to buy that vehicle at an easy, affordable EMIs. That is one of the biggest challenges that will have in the growth and uptake of electric vehicles that we are seeing. And this is one of the stories that I showed was one of the major players for electric three-wheeler growth and is kind of impacting the two-wheeler growth. So we need to look at easy, affordable retail finance.
Yeah. Hello. I have two questions about the electrical vehicles. I'm Dr. Sneha Parikar. I'm from Monitor Institute of Global.
Previously, these are ratings, all those energy efficient ratings, toilet ratios, those things are not there. But once those things are incorporated, वो नहीं होगा तो building plan approval नहीं होगा. Once that is done, people have to mandatorily go for that. And जैसे housing, so when there is an issue in housing society, there is an issue in apartments. If a rule comes up that RERA registration will only happen when a mandatory electric vehicle charging station is there, like depending on वो जितना दिखा रहे हैं, इतने cars का, they will show parking, they will show this much of parking. The maximum category, so once those rules are brought about in the planning, let's say for example, all big cities, any city for that matter, have development authorities. Like there are or the corporation person which approves the planning plan. So I personally think if any planning plan in a big building is that particular rule of the way parking itna hona chahiye, that rule that having a station is mandatory. That is one. Second, what has already happened? This issue with resident society. So basically, we give something called a sarvakya or amnesty. So all people are given a rule all apartments have to ensure that this has to be done within the time period of 3 years. Otherwise, the plan approval which was given before will be cancelled. There's an amnesty scheme happen. Like if you have an unauthorized construction, then please get it regularized, otherwise leave that. So that is one thing which can be easily done. The only thing is, as was being said at the end, getting it enforced well. Because the laws, it's not about laws, it's always about people. It's like, it's very, if the cost is more than the benefit, people will, so that is one thing which can be easily integrated in any building plan, and it can be done. That is the first thing that I would say. Second, as far as municipal solid waste management is concerned, I think the government has rules for everything. There's plastic waste management rules, solid waste management rules, biomedical waste management rules, domestic and e-waste management rules. As far as lithium is considered, lithium, nickel, cadmium batteries, all they fall under the e-waste management rules. वो हमारे पास है, equipment का rule, the rules are there. The only thing is, what can a corporation max do? It can virtually collect all the waste. जैसे for example in Odisha, if we tell, we have Saturday, Sundays dedicated exclusively for collection of e-waste. Saturday, Sunday को TV, computer जो भी है, पर उसके बाद what to do? The batteries that is there, the storage that is there, how to dispose, and that is something which is only an R&D decision. Because I said, like, this is not a discussion for us also. Even car dealerships, big dealerships, उनका भी वही है. Because if the costs don't come down, people will not buy electric vehicles. That is very, very important. If the costs don't come down, you cannot convince people to buy electric vehicles. Because here we are discussing about people who can afford a Merc or a BMW. Like, at the lower levels, अगर Maruti 800 का भी electric vehicle का cost उतना कम नहीं है, people cannot buy. That is very, very important, and that is a big issue with this business. So उनका R&D is working very hard. Like this thing that has come up, this initially when lithium batteries were there, cell life or the life was very less. But now with gradual movement, they've gone very higher. Now gradually what will happen is they will also come up. They have to come up. There is no other alternative. They have to come up with solutions for they have to come up with solutions for handling. So what we can do is, as far as electric vehicles is concerned, go making it mandatory for all building plan approvals to have particular incentives. Second, as we said, e-waste collection to be done proper. Special, for example, somebody is buying an electric vehicle, his पूरा data is to be given. For example, आप electric vehicle कर लो, RTO के पास register कर लो, RTO will just send the data to the MSW cell of the corporation. So whenever and wherever he needs to dispose his battery of, जैसे EPR, we can have something like an EPR for people, extended producer responsibility होता है. He has to actually come and surrender it to the corporation with the minor charge whatsoever the corporation is. But as of now, that is the thing I think. Thank you.
Hi, my name is.
You mean to say that you are anticipating that giving more electric buses will polarize the society? If it is so, then I am not in agreement, because that's what equity is. Can you please tell me what exactly you want to ask?
My question comes from the point that accessibility to it. Of course, with public transport, it is something that we're envisioning to be accessible to majority of the society. But when we're referring to electric vehicles, of course, the switch from diesel cars to electric cars will be, that's the premise this question is based on. So, fragmentation of society.
So, accessibility of EVs in public transport will definitely see a fund to leverage that fund and buy and procure more electric buses for them. But at individual level, like what one of the participants asked, will there be a shift in the number of cars in future if EVs come? So I don't think that EVs will bring a very tremendous shift in ownership, because if I have to buy a car, then only I will buy a car, and then there will be an option whether I have to buy a conventional car or an EV car. Then if it is affordable, if it is more convenient, if it is more financially economical, then only I will choose an EV. I will not just go and buy a new car just because an EV car has come in the market. So that's the point to be taken in consideration, that EVs are not going to have a very significant change in the demand for a personalized modes of transport. EVs will be only asked for when there is a demand. If there are no EVs, then definitely people will go for conventional IC engine based cars. So, Amit, you want to add something?
Well, there will be only one question we'll be able to take, ladies and gentlemen.
No, I think Abhi raised a very good point, and I think some of the panelists have already alluded to it on the importance of subsidies, for the sector. And I think if I'm not understanding your question correctly, is exactly that of how much subsidies do we need to give to the by income groups, for those that cannot afford. And I think Mr. Saxena, you also talked about that the running costs, the operational costs are lower than the cost of petrol, but it is that capital investment of buying the vehicles. And I want to also take the opportunity now to bring the attention back to the importance of rules, regulations and legislations that play a role in taking this debate and making those transformations happen on ground. From benefiting from the example of Dr. Mohapatra, who showcased that cities, if they want to take leadership under the ambit of the mayors, of the commissioners, they can make those transformational shifts in the legislations, in the regulations that respond to these future needs. One reason why the West is advanced in these areas is because they see a new invention or new types of innovation coming in. They proactively change the regulations to accommodate that. And I can speak from my personal experience that 15 years back, when the car share, this whole Uber, the Zip cars, these types of new methods of mobility were coming in, the New York City changed its planning regulations and zoning codes 15 years back, when the market uptake of this was not as high as it is today, but to make sure that the policies, the regulations, the zoning codes accommodate or account for the changes that will take place in the public interest. So again, one drawback, and this is a great forum to be here to say that from the expertise of everybody on the panel, we have the tools, we have the precedents, and we need support from the leaders here, the commissioners, the mayors, to help us in making these transformations actually take shape.
Thank you. My name is Sachin. I'm from Gujarat.
On the number one, I don't have a clear answer. What I would say is, in the terms of cost-benefit analysis, I had done one analysis which is in public domain. I can share with you the public bus transport system, BRTS. Generally speaking, especially for smaller and medium cities, let's say anything below population of 5 million, the bus system has a VCR ratio which is maybe 3 times better or even 4 times better than a metro system. So what Professor Tiwari was also saying, that we should get away from these big land projects, that we want a metro necessarily. I think what we need to be clear about is we need public transport. And what is the best optimum way to achieve public transport? In most cities, the answer will be, bus system, and now electric bus system, given that their cost.
Just to add to your question on the cost-benefit analysis, we have the numbers with us, but it's not only a question of numbers only, because public bus transportation system, STUs, we call them over here, so they have a capacity constraint in operations and maintenance of the electric buses also. So it is not only the cost that one has to look at, they are not equipped to operationalize and maintain those buses in a similar fashion which a private sector can do. So it's a factor of one cost, and other is the capacity also.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, to come forward and felicitate Mr. Abhishek Saxena. Now can we have Mr. Devashi Pandya, our CFO, AIILSG, to felicitate. Let's put our hands together, everybody. Dr. Sunny George, to please come forward and felicitate Mr. Amit. Let's give it up, everybody.
Mr. Ekansh Jain to please come forward and Dr. Chandan Karkare to come forward and felicitate Dr. Gaurav. Thank you so much to our speakers and moderator for this wonderful session. Can we request you to please come forward?